I'm Andres Perez, a videographer and photographer in San Antonio. Recently, I had the pleasure of photographing a Catholic baptism. From that experience, I want to share with you some advice so you can provide the most value to your client, whether that's family, friend, or a paying client. Now, the first piece of advice I have for you is to understand the client's needs and priorities. More than likely, it's going to be to document for prosperity because this is a once in a lifetime event. It's something that's never going to happen again, so they want to make sure they have those pictures to remember upon. But another thing to consider is how are those pictures going to be used? Now, of course, they're going to be for personal use, but it's becoming more and more common for them to be shared on social media, whether that's Facebook, Instagram, or one of the other many options that there are out there. So you want to get specific because every platform is different. Some of them share it in vertical, others in landscape, and some do it in square. So you want to have that in mind when you're taking pictures. Or you may want to give yourself more room so that you can crop afterwards when you're editing. Some people still like to print their photos. So are they going to be putting them in frames or are they going to be putting them in a photo album? The last thing to consider is, what about family portraits? Many times people come from out of town or they just don't get together very often. So they're going to want to have a picture of everybody. It's up to you to find out how many people are you going to be doing on location or are you moving somewhere else. As for my second tip, speak with the priest. Get the do's and don'ts. You need to know, is flash okay? A lot of them find it distracting. They don't want you to use it at all. And others only want you to use it during certain parts of the ceremony. And what areas are you allowed in? You need to know what section, what line you can't cross, and where it is that you can go. This will let you know how close you can get to the action. And what about equipment setup? If flash isn't okay, can you bring your own lighting? They may say no, they may say it has to be battery powered, but you can't really know until you ask. Last thing you need to account for is time. Do they have a ceremony coming right after? If they do, these are things you need to account for. Now, I didn't get the opportunity to use tips 1 or 2 because you see what happened was the baptism that I attended was my cousin's son. I'm going to refer to him as my nephew, and you can correct me in the comments below. But I got the invitation a couple of days before, and I decided all by myself to bring my camera and see what happens, which I'm glad I did because I was the only photographer there. They didn't book one, but it did affect the way I made my choices and the gear that I brought. Now for tip number 3, you want to bring the right gear because first of all, you don't want to bring everything. It gets heavy, it takes up space, a lot of it you're not going to use, so why bother? But at the same time, you want to bring, basically you want to have options, right? The worst thing that can happen is that you don't have something that you need and then you're stuck. So a few things to consider. The flash, is it allowed? The lighting, maybe you're not going to be using it during the event, but what about afterwards for the portraits? And a tripod, or are you going to be holding it yourself? You can be moving around. These are all questions that you already know to ask because you're watching this video. You spoke with the client, you spoke with the priest. A lot of this is already answered for you. But the other thing to consider is the lens. Now, I always recommend you have fast lens because it helps. It definitely helps in those low light situations, which, let's face it, most churches, that's what they are. They have low light. But at the same time, you need to consider the focal length. Are you going to be able to get up close, maybe with a 50 millimeter, maybe 35? Or are you going to end up being far away? You might need something like a 200 millimeter length. As for me, what I ended up using was the Canon 70D and the Canon 55 to 250 millimeter length. Now, this thing gave me a lot of options because, again, I didn't get that chance to speak with the client. I wasn't trying to be invasive, so I wasn't going to get up close and personal. I knew I was going to be shooting from the pew. This gave me a lot of options. I was able to get some wide shots. I was able to get some medium shots. This really just came in handy for most of the pictures. This is what I used. But I also used the 50 millimeter, the Nifty 50, the 1.8. That's what I ended up using for some of the closer shots for after the ceremony. So if you're in need of new gear, I'll put an affiliate link in the description below to the gear that I used. Tip number 4 is dress appropriately. Now we're in Texas, weather's crazy. A couple of days ago it was 80 degrees. Then we got into the 30s. Now we're back in the 50s. It changes, but most of the time it's hot. Now just because it's hot doesn't mean that you can be in a t-shirt. If you're going to be up there, then you're going to be on display. You need to dress appropriately. I'd say something with buttons is a minimum, whether it's short sleeve or long sleeve. You may not necessarily have to wear a jacket, but something with buttons for sure. And ladies, you pretty much already know how to dress, so I don't think I have to tell you. But the last thing too is you want to be comfortable. You're going to be on your feet for a couple hours. What I recommend is getting some nice shoes with a rubber sole underneath. That way it gives it a little bit more cushion and it feels a little bit more comfortable while you're standing. For my 5th tip, consider what kind of style you'll be shooting in. What kind of perspective will you be taking? What kind of angles will you be using? What's the mood of the event? What story will you be telling? And the light and colors, how are you going to use these? Now some of this stuff you can decide after the fact when you're editing, but I highly recommend you think about it ahead of time, because the more you have in your head when you're shooting, the better things will come out, rather than trying to figure it on the day of and afterwards trying to fix the things that you wish you did. As for me, I took a perspective of a guest, of a participant. So I wasn't going to be using very many angles. I was going to be shooting from the pew. And what I decided to do was I sat on a different side of the church than my family did. Because what I wanted to do is I wanted to capture the event in a realistic manner. It was going to be a joyous but pious event. And I wanted to make sure that mood showed up when I captured those pictures. These are things that you want to consider before you head down to the church. For tip number 6, consider your subjects. Now your main subject, of course, is going to be the baby that's being baptized. But also consider the family. So don't forget about the audience. You know, they're there, they're participants. You may want to get them praying. You might want to get them with their happy faces. But the other thing too is get some detail shots. Get some shots from the church. You know, those are things that, little details that really help to tell the story, where you can work without them, but it just really enriches the experience and the final product. Now for my 7th tip, have fun. After you're done with the shot list that you put together with your client, now's the time to get those interesting pictures. Now's the time to play around with different angles, with lighting, with reflection, just getting those really awesome different pictures that are just fun to do. You see, these kind of pictures, they may not necessarily be what the client appreciates, but what I found that these are the kind of pictures that you may be able to add to your portfolio. From my experience, if that's the case, then the client may not necessarily contract you to get the same kind of photo, but it's because they like your style, they like you, and that matters more than anything. So if this sounds like you, make sure to subscribe, because this is the channel for you. Now check out this video so you can learn about this small but powerful light that can help you improve your videography.